SSCA Easier and Safer Cruising Summit. Tricks, tips, techniques, and solutions to problems. All of us have them. Special ways we have found to make our SSCA cruising life easier and safer. Don't be surprised to hear what seems like contradictory opinions. We purposefully have individual conversations with each speaker or couple so they do not hear what others are saying. They are not arguing with or biased by someone else's opinion. In cruising, as in life, there is no one solution for everyone. So we hope listeners realize these are personal opinions based on individual experience, and they will form their own judgment for their own situation. In this episode, we again have a great lineup of subjects. Our main topic is passage planning. Passage planning can be a stressful task, especially for beginners, because it can mean the difference between having a comfortable, safe trip or a terrifying ordeal. So learn the 5-step process developed over many decades of experience by a knowledgeable member couple. Discover which step can greatly reduce your stress and even help you learn to hone your planning skills yourself. Avoid the big no-no of passage planning. We also have 2 short subjects: personalizing a watch-keeping schedule and heavy weather sailing and boat preparation. In our quickie ideas areas, we have some quick ideas for avoiding those boat bites and a handy gadget recommendation for multi-jobs aboard. I'll be having conversations with Dave and Sherry McCampbell of Soggy Paws the Monohull and Soggy Paws the Catamaran. Have written extensively for SSCA and several cruising magazines and given presentations at many GAMs and took on the formidable SSCA Destination Project. Stefano P. Viali from Galaxy. Stefano is a boat builder, charterer, and a big advocate of catamaran. Melinda Shell of Seashell. She and her late husband Harry have cruised extensively and have been long-time contributors to the SSCA Bulletin. Melinda is also heading up the SSCA Mentorship Program. Rob Dubin of Ventana, circumnavigator, filmmaker, and the creator of Sailing Quarterly Video Magazine. Rudy and Jill Sachet of Briny Bug, known for their frugal cruising tips and trawler training. Bill Cullen of Triumph, whose webinar, thebookofsail.com, was the most attended during the first virtual annual meeting. Analysis paralysis. We've all heard that term, and it especially applies for when cruisers are trying to figure out when to leave on an important passage. So what kind of advice can you give us?
We don't like going out and get beat up. And so it's kind of a 5-step process that we use. First is from a macro level, is understanding what season is best for doing the passage that you plan to make. It's very important because the weather can vary super widely, be terrible in some seasons and be perfect in other seasons. So the first step is to look at the passage you're trying to make and do research on the best time to make that passage. And the first place I look is Jimmy Cornell's World Cruising Route. Jimmy Cornell is an SSCA member who has written 4 or 5 books on cruising planning and preparation and actually cruising. And his World Cruising Route is the Bible for figuring out the best time to make a passage from point A to point B. And Jimmy has researched a lot of this himself, but he reached out to us one time. We were on passage from French Polynesia to Hawaii, and he emailed us and said, "Hey, I want to get a recap of your passage, and because you're doing it at a different time in a different way than what most people do," and it ended up coming out in the next edition of his book. So he does a lot of research as well as his own personal experience. So the season you plan to go determines the challenges you're going to face, whether the wind's going to be with you or not with you, likelihood of storms, what the current's doing, and all of that kind of stuff. Also, SSCA articles from other cruisers that have made the same passage that you're planning are really helpful because usually they're recaps of the passage and they can tell you, well, we went in April and we had a great passage and somebody else went in July and they had a terrible passage. That kind of information is what you start out with.
And how do you determine when you leave for a passage? Helen was saying that she trusted you implicitly.
Well, first of all, I read Jimmy Cornell's books. I got a good idea of when to be where, okay? So I don't go across the Atlantic in July, okay? Across the Atlantic or the Pacific, so I go for a long trip when I have the highest chances of finding a favorable wind. And that's for a long passage.
The second step is at that time of year that you've selected as the best time to make passage, is how often do weather systems move through there and what kind of changes in the wind and the waves and the current and all that happen when those weather systems move through. That gives you an idea of what the window is for if you're going to make a 3-day passage. If you can pick a 3 days between 2 sets of bad weather systems, then you can pretty much just time it till the end of the previous bad weather system, and then go and usually have enough time to get to another place without running into more bad weather. If it's a 14-day trip and weather systems come through every 4 or 5 days, you need to make sure you've thought through what the changes in your conditions and the wind and all of that are going to do to you when you're on passage. So for that reason, we normally plan passages as short as possible. We hop when we can, and we plan and stop to make sure we can always try to always be out in good weather.
For a shorter passage, like, there was a lot of discussion in Fiji. Sorry, in Tonga, when to leave Tonga to go to New Zealand. When you leave Tonga to go to New Zealand, you have to cop one low pressure.
Right.
Now you can stay there in Tonga waiting and do analysis, and you get what they call analysis paralysis.
Right.
So at the end of the day, really, you gotta go. Okay, I mean, you can see if there is a really bad low pressure, and then you don't. You wait another 7 days or something like that. But if you are in the average of the low pressure, well, you're gonna cop it. So just go. I just go. I trust my boat. I trust my ability, to reduce sail. I don't stress the boat. But if I got to take a little bit of a beating, well, so be it.
Let's see. Step number 3, that's part of your thinking process, needs to be what kind of weather is ideal for you and your crew and your boat. Our heavy build 44-foot monohull hardly could get out of its way unless the wind got up to 15 knots. And so we needed to look for wind that was at least 15 knots, especially if we were going downwind, because the speed of your boat is subtracted from the wind, and then you end up with only 10 knots of relative wind, which wasn't really enough to make us comfortable under sail. Our lightweight catamaran, on the other hand, will go 5 or 6 knots in 10 knots of wind. And so we much prefer, another of the reasons why we prefer the catamaran, we much prefer going out in lighter wind. And people who just want to sail, who don't want to spend any money on diesel and all of that, really need to look for passages where the wind is blowing, rather than what we kind of do is wait for the wind to die down and sort of motor sail, especially if we're going the wrong way. So that's another, is understanding what makes your boat go and what kind of conditions you like to be out in, and then watch for those weather systems. So then you're there. You know what the season is. You know what kind of a weather window you're looking for, and then it's a matter of monitoring the weather forecast using all available sources. And those sources might include being able to get grid files, which are compact amount of weather data showing what the wind's going to do over the next 14 days. Nowadays, people are using Windy if you have the internet, and a service like Predict Wind, which provides weather if you don't mind buying Iridium Go and a $150 a month communications package. You could get 4 different models and all kinds of information, but the minimum amount is to get a wind forecast for the next 10 days or so. I start monitoring when we're going to go on a long passage a couple weeks in advance. Again, watching for the patterns and how things develop and what happens when the system passes through. And I even, on this last trip we made down to the Solomons, where we were going against the wind in some cases, started getting grid files a year in advance, so I could see ahead of time, a year ahead, what the patterns were going to be and whether we really could sail with the wind all the way down to Papua New Guinea, which we were able to do that because we picked the right time of year. The other thing is, too, when you're looking at, you're getting ready to go any day now, is to look at the rate of change of the weather forecast. So let's say you're thinking maybe you're going to leave on Tuesday. Well, on Saturday, the forecast is showing 15 knots on Tuesday. On Sunday, the forecast for Tuesday is showing 5 knots. And on Monday, the forecast for Tuesday is showing 20 knots. That's a really bad sign. That means that the weather guessers are really guessing, and they don't really know what's going to happen. And so you got to be ready for some really variable weather. If, on the other hand, the forecast for Tuesday, as you're watching it get closer, stays the same, it is much more likely to be a solid forecast. Also, the forecast is really, even though you can get a forecast for 14 days out, the forecast is really only solid for the next couple of days. And then it's less and less likely that it's really going to look like that. So you need a way to monitor the weather while you're on passage, if you have a long passage, to update your plan. And sometimes people have set out on a long passage and the weather had changed and they actually turned around and came back because it looked like it was going to be too tough to continue on. Finally, for long passages in difficult areas, many people hire a pro. We did on at least one passage crossing the Pacific when we got down to Easter Island, and there was a weather system coming, and we didn't feel comfortable understanding which way we needed to go because we couldn't stay at Easter Island because there's no protection there. We took advantage of a professional forecaster who routed us around the strong low that passed by. So, especially for new people setting out, I would suggest hiring someone. And it's everything from a very expensive weather forecaster to someone like Chris Parker, who is the weather guru in the East Coast of the U.S., the Bahamas, and the Caribbean. He's very reasonable. And the thing about Chris Parker and some of the other semi-pro, amateur weather forecasters is that they will explain to you the things about why they think this forecast is going to turn out the way they think it's going to, and why you should be doing this route instead of that route. And you learn as time goes on. You learn enough that you can do a lot of that forecasting yourself, and you feel much more confident in your ability to read a grid file and see what's going on. So that's another way to learn about the weather, is listening in on the single sideband to guys like Chris Parker in the U.S. Giving their forecast, because you learn how the systems work. And that's it. When it looks good, we got the boat ready, we go.
I really like the way that you laid that out, Sherry, with the 1, 2, 3 steps. I think it's really something that newbies can follow along with and follow that advice. So thanks. I mean, it's very instructional, and like you say, maybe paying a navigation service, a routing service, you actually will learn something and be more confident for your next passage. So thanks a lot. Melinda, you said you have some important ideas to share about passage planning and being responsible about the weather. Tell us more.
Yes. One of the things people said to us over and over again, oh, weren't you afraid? Weren't you scared of the weather? What was the worst storm you were ever in? I mean, they like to hear the dramatics. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, I said we were fair weather sailors. If we knew that there was going to be bad weather, we stayed put. We just didn't go. We waited till we knew we were going to have a fair passage, and then we would go. And I don't want to do an advertisement here, but I'll tell you, Chris Parker, I put Chris Parker on a pedestal. Chris Parker is the most wonderful weatherman ever. We got to know him before he even started his business. We got to know him way back, and in the Bahamas. And he was learning meteorology, and he was reading all these books, and he knew what he was talking about. And we had to do a passage from one of the islands back to the States, and so we called him. We said, "Okay, Chris, here's your chance. Give us a weather report." And he told us exactly where to go. He told us exactly when to leave. He was able to predict the tides and so on. And the passage was wonderful. And we got back to the States absolutely no problem. And so I would highly recommend several things. Number one, I would highly recommend, if you're really going to be cruising, long-term cruising, get yourself a good weatherman. And I know there's probably some around the world that are very good, and you guys may have one. Pay the money and get yourself a really good weatherman that is going to be there for you. You're going to be able to call him on your SSB and talk to him about passages, about weather reports, hurricanes, whatever. Chris has been just dynamite. He's got a big business now, and he does a superb job. One story I would just share is that we have been told over and over again that the fifth worst passage in the whole world was the passage from Aruba down to Colombia. And you have to go around all these cliffs. The winds can be horrible, the waves can be horrible, and a lot of people had lost their boats and lost their lives doing this. So it made me nervous, because we were going west, and we were going to go over. We were crossing across the north part of South America. We were going to the ABC Islands, and then around down to Colombia. And I was so nervous, and so I sat down with Chris at one of the seminars. I said, "Okay, Chris, talk me through this. Get me. How can we do this?" And I sat with him for a long time. He showed me the maps. He showed me what the predictions were, and what kind of weather happens. He said, I'm going to talk you through this whole thing. So when you get to Aruba, he said, you're going to stay on the radio with me, and I'm going to tell you exactly when to leave Aruba. I'm going to tell you exactly where to go, what latitude and longitude you need to stay, and you're going to report to me every 12 hours where you are, etc. And we did it. It was the most wonderful passage we ever had. It was just absolutely fantastic. We had not a moment of being scared or anything. It was just a beautiful passage. And we had 4 days of just lovely weather because we followed exactly what Chris said. So the point is, get yourself a good weatherman and take responsibility, but don't go out if you think that it's going to be really bad. Nobody's in a big hurry when you're sailing.
Okay, thanks, Melinda. Your and Sherry's recommendation to hire weather routers that are willing to teach you should help reassure anyone, even a little bit nervous, about an important passage.
So that's how I choose the passages. The other things that I tell everybody that come and visit me and that plan to visit me is that I don't sail on a schedule.
Right.
I believe that schedules are the most dangerous things of sailing. If you need to go somewhere because somebody is arriving with a plane, or if you need to go somewhere because somebody is leaving with another plane, that's when you're gonna get caught. You're gonna get caught, and you're gonna get in some bad weather, and it happens too often for comfort, as far as I'm concerned. So if I see that I can't go somewhere, I just don't go. I wait, or I don't go there altogether. I go somewhere else, and I tell people, I'm going to be in this area, and I'm going to do my best to be here because I know that you can get there with an airplane. And I'm going to try my best to be there 2 or 3 days before you arrive, so there is a buffer of safety there. But you got to be prepared that if I'm not there, you'll have to go and find me wherever I am. So that's the thing that I would really highly recommend anybody, just not to ever travel on a schedule. Never say I'm going to be there on a certain day unless you can be there 4 or 5 days earlier in safety.
And one of the big things that people always say is if you have company coming and you expect to be on an island, you can either give them a date or a place, but don't give them both. Because you never know whether you're actually going to get to that island before when they fly in or whatever. So that's just my thoughts on the weather.
Okay, thank you, Sherry, Stefano, and Melinda, for great advice to make planning that big passage less stressful and more successful, and to avoid the big no-no of getting caught with a deadline or a schedule. Once launched on that big passage, another important consideration is a watch schedule that's fair and keeps everyone rested. Let's hear from Sherry and Dave how they developed their own personal watch system.
So my dad, I started cruising with my dad when I was in high school on a 41-foot trimaran, and he was retired U.S. Navy. So naturally, we went with the Navy watch system, which is 4 hours on and 4 hours off. And I grew up with that and never actually considered doing anything different than that when I started cruising with my husband many years ago. But when Dave and I set out, different husbands, we experimented a little bit. We started out with the 4 hours on, 4 hours off, and then we talked about how that was working for us. I think Dave's ex-wife had wanted a shorter schedule, 3 hours on, 3 hours off. It's always nice to have a shorter watch. But for me, I have trouble getting to sleep after my watch. And so we experimented with a 6 hour watch schedule. It's a long time to be on watch by yourself, especially when the weather's bad and everything. But it means that I get nearly a full night's sleep. And so that's after a couple of years of trying different watch schedules, that's what we settled on, and we both like it. We basically take sunrise to sunset, which here in the tropics is almost always 12 hours, and split it in half. So if the sun goes down at 5:30, that's when my watch starts, and in the middle of that, I wake Dave up, and he goes till 5:30 in the morning. In inclement weather situations or with lots of traffic, a long watch like that's a little trying, but usually you're waking the other person up anyway to help you with sail changes and close passages with chips and all of that stuff. So ours is fairly fluid. If someone's feeling under the weather or whatever, we'll adjust the watch schedule. If we end up having dinner late for whatever reason, and I don't get started on my official watch till 7 o'clock, then I'll let Dave sleep a little bit longer so he gets a full 6 hours of sleep. The main thing for us is when you're losing sleep after a couple of days, if you can't get that sleep back, you're not thinking straight. And if emergency situations come up, you need everyone in the crew to be well rested and have the brains on straight. So that's why getting a real good night's sleep for everybody is a good thing. And I don't sleep during the day. The light, I don't know what it is. So I need a full 6 hours at night, and I'm pretty fresh the next day. So on our boat, we tried to set, once we decided on how long a watch needed to go, we set the watches up based on our own personal sleep patterns. You know, if somebody is an early riser, then maybe you put them on a watch that's better suits that. For me, I tend to stay up later at night than Dave normally does. So I took the watch that goes from 6 p.m. to midnight, and then wake Dave up after he's had a good sleep, and he takes midnight to 6 a.m. watch. And we're pretty flexible, though. If situations arise that we need to change things, we can change things around. Also, the question about can you sleep on watch? I know Jimmy Cornell, who's a pretty famous around-the-world cruiser. I think he's circumnavigated 3 or 4 times. He was horrified at today's modern crew who wants to sit at watch with their headphones on and listen to music. He says he does not allow his crew at all to do anything but sit there and be alert. On our boat, it's okay for the on-watch crew to take cat naps, to read books, or listen to music in the cockpit. Yeah, somebody is always on watch, but it's important we set a timer. We use like a little kitchen timer to make sure that we pull our head out of the book or wake up every 15 to 20 minutes and stand up and take a good look around, let our eyes adjust to the darkness, and make sure nothing's sneaking up on us. Around that time, we also, if conditions warrant, flip on the radar for a minute or two and look for storm cells that might be sneaking up on us, or unlit fishing boats with no AIS, which is common around in Southeast Asia. And of course, we're always nowadays have our AIS on. So you need to make sure that you trust your crew, whoever it is, to be aware of conditions, to be listening for the wind starting to pick up a little, to be watching for clouds that blot out the stars, which might mean a squall is approaching, that they've got to get up out of their seats, adjust their eyes to the darkness, and look around every 15 or 20 minutes to make sure nothing sneaks up on you.
A couple more things on that I thought about while she was talking. First, the Navy, who probably first set up the watch schedules, to be 4 hours, or at least that's what they have been using for hundreds of years now. It did that for a reason, and the reason is that 4 hours is about the minimum amount of time that you can get pretty much full value for that amount of time sleeping. It takes you a few minutes, maybe up to a half an hour to finally get asleep, and then of course once you get woken up, that's the end of it. But so that ends up being 3 hours and a half, 3 hours and 15 minutes, 3 hours and 45 minutes, but it gets you full value for the sleep, and there have been many studies that they have done to validate that. The other thing is that our actual schedule kind of works like this. If we're in the tropics, sun goes down around 6, gets up around 6. What we're normally trying to do is have dinner around 6, 6:30 at the latest. Then I do dishes, and then I'm in bed by 7 o'clock. Sherry's got to watch from 7 to 1 at night, and then she wakes me up 15 minutes early, and I come up and we do a proper exchange of watches. And then I've got to watch until about 7 in the morning. At 7, I make sure that she's up. Then I have breakfast. She has breakfast. We have breakfast together. And then I go take a nap from about 8 until 9 or 10 o'clock, maybe even 11, in order to get my 8 hours of sleep, which is what I really need to be alive and awake during the day. If Sherry needs, if we've had a particularly difficult night with storms and all that, if she needs sleep, then she would do that in the afternoon. And during the day, typically she is around watching what's going on in the morning, and I do the same in the afternoon. If one of us needs to do a project or something, then we can shift off. But we don't have a real firm watch schedule during the day. But during the night, it's 6 hours, and we found that to be much better than the shorter 4 hours.
That's a good idea to adjust the watch schedule according to your different personalities. Luckily, Luke and I are like you, where I can sleep anytime, anywhere, any position, but he has to have the night, so we adjust our watch schedule the same. But what if, despite all best planning, the weather gets nasty? Rob had the great fortune to be mentored by many of the who's who's of sailing and gives us some great insights to heavy weather sailing.
Well, heavy weather sailing, of course, is always a concern for everybody. And I first would say that if you're sailing just in the Caribbean, as so many people from the United States do, and if you really plan your weather windows, you can get by without probably hitting much of any long-term big storms, because you're big, especially if you island hop, if you do the Gentleman's Passage, you're never going to be more than a couple days at sea. When you cross an ocean, of course, you're going to get whatever comes your way, and you don't have any choice in the matter. I would say that I was quite lucky. As you guys know, I was a sort of a professional in the sailing journalism world, and we made videotapes for many years. And what that allowed me to do is it allowed me to sail on a lot of other people's boats long after I was a competent sailor. So I was still learning, even though I had, hundreds of days at sea. I was sailing with professional skippers and very experienced people, and that allowed me to get my first heavy weather sailing. We were involved in the very first Caribbean 1500. I guess maybe that might have been 92 or thereabouts. And we hit a tropical depression in the Gulf Stream not long after leaving Norfolk. And it gave me the chance to experience heavy weather without the additional heavy burden of being the skipper and having to make the decisions. All I had to do was deal with the weather when I was on watch and do what the skipper told me. And so that was a really beneficial learning experience for me. And one of the things I always remember is that my close friend Steve Black, who started the Caribbean 1500, used to say, when you get into heavy weather, you have to learn to make a differentiation between what's life-threatening and what's just extremely uncomfortable. And if you have a well-found boat, probably anything short of a hurricane, it's really not life-threatening. It's just extremely uncomfortable. And so if you can get your first heavy weather experience not on passage, that's highly what I recommend. And one of the things that is difficult about dealing with heavy weather is it usually happens, if you know a big storm's coming, you're not going to leave port. So it usually happens when you've already been out at sea for multiple days on a big, longer passage. So you're already not getting as much sleep as you should. You may worry, you see the storm's coming, so you're worried for a day or two before it actually gets there. So you're already halfway whipped before the bad weather really starts. And so what I recommend to people is when you see it's going to blow 30 knots and it's going to be just outside your harbor, get a couple of friends and maybe an experienced sailor and go try it out for 2 or 3 hours. You're only a couple hours from getting back into the safety of the harbor, and you get the chance to experience the heavy weather in little bite-sized bites so that you're not doing it on your own boat, on your own first big passage, something like that. And I always recommend to people that they try all of their gear. It's amazing how many people have an emergency tiller, and either they've never put it on, or if they have put it on, it's been when they've been at the dock. And you should go out and drive your boat around in some kind of moderate seas with your emergency tiller and see what it feels like, because it takes, generally, we had an Island Packet 40, very well balanced, full keel, balanced rudder, and it still takes a lot of force to steer it as a tiller steered boat. So practice those things. Practice heaving to, and you can't heave to in 10 knots because your boat will not handle the same way in 10 knots as it will in 40 knots. So go out there when it's 25 or something like that. As I said, when you can just go out of the harbor for a couple hours and come back and practice steering, practice how to go up and down the waves, what's the best angle for the waves, practice different points of sail, practice heaving to, and if you have storm sails, practice that. We did some work with the drag device database, and Larry Party and I spent quite a bit of time talking about deploying sea anchors and things like that. So we also did that. I don't know whether people want to do that or at least know how to do it. I don't know if they have to practice it because it's a monumental thing to sometimes pull your sea anchor back aboard, but at least know how to deploy it, how to stream warps, or if you carry a drogue, go ahead and stream your drogue and learn all those things. And don't do it when you're out at sea 5 days and you're already exhausted and you're debilitated already from, the tension of it. Do it when you're rested. You can go out of the harbor for a couple hours and do it that way. So that's my advice on heavy weather sailing.
Okay, you said you talked with Larry Party about those drogues and sea anchors and that. What's your opinion of that in heavy weather?
We did one of our videos that we did for Sailing Quarterly. We went out with Don Street and we deployed those series, a series drogue, I think it's called, and they were sort of triangular shaped fabric things.
Yes.
We deployed that, and then we also deployed the big, kind of looks like a bird cage made out of 2-inch wide nylon straps. Can't remember, Gale Rider, I think. And we deployed that. They were very easy to deploy. If you did it, it was a little learning process, so we got better when we had done it a few different times. And you throw it over with the line wrapped around one of your cockpit winches, and you ease it out so that you can, like you're easing a sheet or something. And you need a lot of heavy cordage to do that. I think we had a 7/8 or 1-inch diameter, several hundred feet of nylon, and of course that takes a lot of storage space, but we felt it was worth it. We did it for our filming. We actually never used it on our circumnavigation. We also deployed a sea anchor just to see what it was like off of the bow, and I gave some input to there was a guy doing that drag device database. I can't remember. Shane, I think was his first name, maybe. And then Larry and I talked about these things at great length when he was writing a book on heavy weather. we happened to run into each other somewhere, and we spent a fair bit of time talking about it. And he wrote a book on heavy weather. The previous book had been written by a Brit named Adlard Coles, and that was what we had on board back in the 90s and 2000, and that was kind of the Bible. But I think Larry had some much more updated information after 2000, and it was probably quite good. We did find that our island packet, with its full keel, and I wouldn't have done this on any other boat but an island packet, because the rudder is so beefy and it's got a strut on the bottom of the rudder. But we were able to, we never had to heave to, even though we went through, waves that were breaking at the height of our spreaders, ripped our radome off that was 15 feet off the deck. But we were able to continue sailing with just a stay sail and a little tiny bit of main. We also carried a storm trysail that I had a separate track, and so when I left port on a major passage, we had it hanked on. All I had to do was shift the halyard over, and we had a storm trysail. And again, we practiced with that to see how our boat would balance. And our boat did pretty well, so we never really even had to heave to, although, of course, we did it a few times, like in the Tuamotus or somewhere, to wait for daylight to enter a harbor.
Okay, Rob, that's good advice. To sail some heavy weather on a veteran's boat, if possible, to learn and practice your skills. Now, you and Dee created a great instructional video about preparing and outfitting a boat for blue water cruising. Give us some little tidbits of ideas. Preparation.
We carried probably half the storage area on our boat seemed to be filled with spare parts. And of course, the longer you sail, the more spare parts you collect. But for me, something that was very, very satisfying was to have something on the boat break, and you're in some remote anchorage, and you've got the spare part on board to fix it. You've got the pump rebuild kit or the injectors or whatever, and it would, as everybody who lives on a boat learns, the boat list gets longer and longer and longer, and having to leave Paradise to go to a port somewhere where you can get a FedEx package shipped in is a whole lot less fun than sitting in a beautiful anchorage and having somebody else from another boat come over and help you rebuild your, water pump or whatever. So carry all the spare parts that you think you might need, and that, to me, was very satisfying to be able to do those kinds of repairs without having to, as they say, go to a town and a harbor and get FedEx and all that. I think the other thing for long distance is you need to be, the more you know about every one of your systems on board, the better off you'll be. And there are some guys out there that, sailing, that they were mechanics or they were electrical engineers, and those people have a huge leg up on somebody like me. I was a filmmaker, and when something broke at my house, I called a repairman to fix it. So when I got on a boat, I knew very little, and my learning curve was very, very steep the first few years that we were out. But I learned, very rapidly, and I guess because I had sailed on so many other people's boats when we were making these sailing movies, I learned what systems broke and what kind of things you needed to carry to repair them, I guess. So long-distance cruising is a balancing act. I mean, just like when the designer wants to add 2 feet to the length of a boat, that throws off every other calculation. He's got to move the mast. You can't just add 2 feet to your stern. You got to move the mast. You got to move the center of effort on the sail plan, et cetera, et cetera. And so planning for long-distance cruising is the same kind of way of how many systems do you have, and every item you add onto your boat to increase its complexity means you're going to spend more time fixing that item. But the converse is maybe it makes your life so much more fun that you stay out cruising. And we did an entire video, an hour-long video on outfitting a cruising sailboat for long-distance cruising. And so a lot of this information would be in that video. But one of the things that I got asked about often after we did this video, when people would contact me directly for advice, they would say, well, I'm not sure my wife's going to like it, so I'm not sure, so I don't think I'll put refrigeration on. Or I'm not sure my wife's going to like it, so we're going to use a bucket instead of a real head. Well, those are self-fulfilling prophecies. You know, if you don't have enough systems to make your life comfortable, then you're probably not going to cruise as long. If you have a reluctant spouse or a reluctant partner, that person may not want to stay out there cruising long. So you have to sort of thread that needle of enough things to make your life comfortable and fun, yet not enough that you're always in port fixing it.
Okay, that's sage advice, Rob. Thanks for that. On a rough passage, every little thing becomes a hazard. Jill has some useful tips for what to do about those boat bites, things that cut, scratch, and catch things.
Those are definitely a hassle. First of all, the way we address wire ties is we cut them off close, and then we give them a final trim. We use toenail clippers because that gives it a smoother and a rounder edge, and it's much closer that way. Now, the second thing is hose clamps can be a problem. So using needle nose pliers, we bend the end down and lay it against the band, or if it's long enough, we curl the end back under itself. That way the end's not sticking out to grab you. Now, cotter pins, again, you want to use needle nose pliers, and you want to use cotter pins with long legs. So you curl the ends back under so that they lay against the legs. It makes a little curlicue there. Then you have safety wire. When you safety wire shackles or other items that need to be safety wired, first of all, of course, you take enough turns with your wire, and once you've got those enough turns taken, you twist the ends of the wires together, and then with the needle nose pliers, you bend the twisted ends down and then under the turns of the wire.
Okay, that sounds like pretty handy information and something everybody can do and simple tools like needle nose pliers and stuff. Like I remember how many different hose clamps I'm always getting hooked up on. So great solutions.
We keep our needle nose pliers handy and available so we can grab them quickly if we need them.
Yeah, those things are something really nice to have. I love my needle nose pliers. I'm also using it for whipping at the end when you whip the end of the line with string and then you pull the ends together. Everything on a boat should serve more than one function. Our gadget man, Bill Cullen, tells us about his favorite tool that's much more than just needle nose pliers.
Well, and you're right. There are a lot of different choices out there when it comes to multi-tool, and I think I've owned several of those choices in the past, but I've come to really like the Skeletool CX multi-tool by Leatherman. And one of the reasons I like it is it just has what I need on it. It doesn't have a lot of extra stuff. You know, it's not a Swiss Army knife. I don't need scissors or a nail file out there on the boat. I just need a pair of pliers and a good knife and maybe a screwdriver, and this has all of those. It's extremely well made. I think it's got some carbon fiber and titanium coating on it, so it doesn't seem to rust. It lasts forever, and the knife just stays sharp forever. It's a good knife. The pliers, of course, have a wire cutter in them too, but one of the things I really like about this one too is if you'll see the hook and the little clip there, this is great. You can clip it onto your belt loop. You can clip it onto a lifeline when you're working somewhere, and I just find that it's a great multi-tool to have. Not inexpensive, not the cheapest one out there, but one that I think that you'd like for the duration.
Yeah, that's a very clever idea. And where could we find one of these tools?
I have, again, on my website, the book of sale, I have a link to the best price I found was on Amazon, but you can find them by just searching Leatherman Skeletools.
Okay, that's great, Bill. It's wonderful to get a recommendation for a great item and where to find it. And that wraps up another great episode. Phew, we covered a lot of ground, or should I say water. As always, I really enjoy talking with all our speakers and marveling at the collective experience our SSCA members have. Remember, we're always seeking new voices and welcome opposite views or different ways of looking at a subject. Disagreeing in silence benefits none of us. Everyone has something valuable to say, so get in on our conversation. We look forward to talking to you in one or more of our next episodes. Till then, keep dreaming of cruising. We hope you enjoyed listening to our guests and took away some new ideas for yourselves. If you have something to say about any subject you heard, it's not too late to join in. Be sure to check out the preview of our next episode. Comment and subscribe on SSCA YouTube channel. Share this video on your social media. And join the camaraderie by participating in our coming new episodes. If you're not a member yet, visit ssca.org to get in on the conversation and gain full access to the SSCA Easier and Safer Cruising Summit.